With wind turbines scaling up and rope access becoming more critical, technicians need proper training for safe and efficient blade repairs. This week, we speak with Alex Fournier, Director of Composite Operations at Intertech. Alex brings insight on the SPRAT certification process and how recent changes are enhancing safety and efficiency for technicians working at height.
Welcome to Uptime Spotlight, shining light on wind energy's brightest innovators. This is the progress powering tomorrow.
Alex, welcome to the program.
Thank you guys for having me once again.
Yeah, we're glad to have you back. You know, there's been so many changes that has happened since the last time you were here. But today we want to talk about SPRAT training and what this means for the industry and what the latest and greatest is in terms of SPRAT. And for those who don't know what SPRAT is, it's actually an acronym, like most things in wind. It's the Society of Professional Rope Access Technicians, and they create the standards around the knowledge you're supposed to have and the skills you're supposed to have if you want to climb with rope access. Now, Alex, I want to start off first, like how big of a problem do we have right now on the training on rope access technicians? I see a lot of variation across the United States in particular. Are you seeing sort of the same thing, that there's just not so much a concrete standard everybody's using?
Well, I think in Canada, we don't have that many schools that offer the course, first of all. So I think we don't have much. In the East Coast, we probably have 3, 4. In the West Coast, they have a little bit more. And it's often vendors that will offer it. So let's say Mistress, for example, offer the course. They do IRATA and SPRAT. I did my course at Nouvelle-Hauteur in Montreal, which is one of the best training center I've seen in all my years of rope access. Celtic Falcon too in the East Coast, really good training center. But I think since we don't have that many, everyone is kind of on the same page. So everyone talk to each other, and the course is pretty well structured, at least in Canada. Before, when I started, the course was 4 days, and then you had 1 day for the exam. So it's a lot to learn in 4 days. But now they changed it to 5 days of course, and then 1 extra day for the exam. So that gives you much time to train. And if you don't understand something, you can really take the time to really understand it, so you're ready for the exam.
Alex, let me ask you a question about SPRAT and IRATA, right? Because SPRAT is the North American version, IRATA is usually the EU version or rest of the world version. They're organizations that push this safety forward, and this is how we should do things. And a lot of times a company will adopt it. Say XYZ operator says, if you're going to be on ropes on my site, you must be SPRAT, level this, level that, level that. However, and correct me if I'm wrong here, but this is my take on it. They're not actually like a governmental association. They're not an OSHA or something that mandates that you must have. It's just these things are in our industry. SPRAT, best practices. This is what people live by. This is how we do it. Okay, right? And that's correct?
Yeah.
So can you walk us through the different levels of SPRAT? Because I know there's a 1, 2, 3. What do those all mean?
Yeah. Well, level 1, basically you're just a basic technician. You just learn all to move yourself on the ropes, basically. So you'll do basic rope to rope transfer, or you're gonna pass deviation, all the basic maneuver that you need to know on ropes. You're gonna learn it into your level 1. Which is great. And then to be a level 1, you just need to be 18-year-old, and you can sign up and do your level 1. That's the only requirement. Level 2 is after you did 600 hours on ropes and 6 months of experience as a level 1. Then you can do your level 2, which you'll learn more. It will be more like rescue scenarios. So you'll do some basic maneuver combined with rescue. But yeah, so as a level 2, you're gonna learn more as taking some charge up and moving some charge up in the air. And then to be a level 3, it's kind of the same thing. You do your level 2, so then 600 hours as a level 2, and then 6 months as a level 2, and then you can go to level 3. And then level 3, you do every basic maneuver that I said in level 1, but it's rescue. So you're going to do 8 climbings, rescue. You're going to do deviation rescue, belay rescue, just rope to rope transfer with a victim on you. So it's every a maneuver with a rescue. Because when you're level 3, normally you're in charge of the site, or you're going to be in charge of all the employees. Not necessarily, but normally that's how it is. So you want to make sure that you're able to rescue pretty much everyone in every scenario.
So what is okay? So we have level ones, level twos, level threes. What is a normal? And we're talking blade repair here, right? This is the Uptime podcast. So what does a normal blade repair SPRAT rope access crew look like?
So I know a lot of people will be mad at what I'm gonna say, but normally when you work, we call it, when the rope access world, the wind turbine industry is the easiest rope access world, because you're only going down, you're only going up. There's not much to it. You're not gonna do crazy deviation, or you're not gonna do like crazy like zip line and all that stuff. Like if you do oil and gas, it's much bigger. But in rope access in the wind industry, normally a level 1 and level 2, it's pretty much that. A level 3 might be overkill sometimes. On big job, you probably want to have one just because you probably have more knowledge in project management. But normally, just a regular team is going to be a level 2 and a level 1.
Yeah, and from my experience, basically everybody's dropping down with two people on the blade. You don't go by yourself. So there's always going to be two technicians on that blade. And that makes sense. What you're saying is like, and while people may not like this, of rope access, what it looks like in that is a little bit easier, because for the most part, you're going up and down in two dimensions, right? It's just up, down on that one thing. Whereas I've been offshore on oil and gas crews where you see people in like three dimensions, guys going across tanks and all kinds of crazy stuff in between pylons. Like that's some pretty advanced stuff. And when you watch those guys work, it is really impressive. Sometimes the really experienced ones, I'm sure they are level 3s or whatever, how they can zip around. It's the same thing on a wind turbine though. If you've never seen that and you watch these people,
It's mind blowing. It's really the industrial athletes. That's how we call it normally, but it's really impressive.
the seasonality of wind makes that kind of stuff difficult, because what happens is from a lot of times, okay, we'll take North America for example, because of our blade repair season. You may be, if you're a rope person, you may be out on ropes from April till September, October, depending on how far north you are. And then you got 3, 4 months off. So coming back around to April again, that's a little bit tough, isn't it? When you're coming off the couch.
Yeah, and I gotta say, like a lot of people, like they take it off in the winter, and I don't blame them because it's really cold when you do ropes. But when you come back, if you are off bench more than 6 months, you should do a day at a training center to just put you back in your element. So yeah, you should still practice a little bit, but yeah, coming back after 2 months of holidays or 3 months of like vacation, it can be hard. Yeah, you're gonna be sore. Definitely, the first day you're gonna be sore.
Let me ask the obvious question, because a lot of guys that do wind turbine work in the summertime do something else in in the fall and the winter, but they want to stay on ropes. So is then the SPRAT carries over. So even if you're just doing SPRAT work for a wind turbine, you can get over into oil and gas and do some rope work there, or wherever the place is. So SPRAT is a universal training system in a sense. It's not just wind specific.
Yeah, it's kind of like a driver license, and the wind turbine industry is kind of like the car. So let's say you go to oil and gas, well, you have your driver license, your rope access guy, but the car is, let's say, like the oil and gas industry. Like myself, I started in 2015 as a rope access technician, and I started doing window cleaning in Montreal. So I was washing windows, and then one of my friends got me into the wind industry. But definitely around the SPRAT universe, you can do building maintenance, you can do oil and gas, you can go in mines, you can go in wind turbines. So there's a lot of universe that are related to the SPRAT industry, as well as IRADA.
So staying up to date on it, what kind of changes have you seen lately for the SPRAT certification? What does it look like?
So for SPRAT, one of the big change that will be related to the wind industry is that you don't need a level 3 on site anymore. So I know a lot of people, because you cannot have a level 3s on every wind turbine of your project. So SPRAT said, as long as you're level 2, just do up and down maneuver. So you cannot do like crazy belays and zip line and all that stuff, but we basically just do up and down, right? So as long as you do up and down maneuver, and your level 2 is trained well, you can have only a level 2 taking care of the job.
So to get to that point of being a level 2, if you're just starting in the industry, takes several months to get there. What's the best way to go about doing that?
If you're really new, like let's say it's your first time like doing something related to wind industry and you're level 1 and you're just starting, SPRAT say that 600 hours and 6 months as a level 1 to be level 2. You need to know it's 600 hours on ropes. Like you cannot be just chilling in the wind turbine doesn't count as being on ropes. You actually need to be on ropes or culling ropes or putting ropes in a bag. Doesn't count as hours. So you need to be 600 hours on ropes in 6 months as a level 1. I will say if you're able to do 600 hours in one season in 6 months, that's really good. You can do your level 2. Obviously, will give you more seniority, like you're going to be a level 2, so you can tap your shoulder. But I will say if you're really new, maybe I will do another year as a level 2, not as a supervisor, but just to understand like all the industry work, and slowly taking the role as a level 2. But that will be my approach. Like let's say you get your ticket and then you do one season as just a level 2, and then once you're ready you go as a lead. That will be how I will do it. That's how I did it. But I mean, if of course, if you're ready, you think after your 600 hours, go ahead and do it. But that's how I see it.
Well, we're talking blade repair too, right? So rope. This is why blade repair is like it's so complicated, because we're just talking about the rope access part of it, right? We're just talking about how you get to work.
Yeah, we didn't talk about blade yet.
Yeah, your commute is probably one of the craziest commutes in the world to get to the actual job task. But then you got to get there. Then you got to learn blade repair, right? So I think that like if you're a Sprat level 1, basically you're a minimum of a season. Sprat level 2, you're probably 2 seasons. And then Sprat level 3, maybe at the beginning of that 4th year, you're taking your level 3 and you're ready to kind of run a crew. Does that look about right?
Yeah, it look about right. Like for myself, I did 2 years as a level 1, 1 year as a level 2, and then I did my level 3 like really fast. But I was ready to do it. But yeah, because like you said, you also need to learn how to do fiberglass also, right? So you got to learn how to be confident on ropes and how to manage all your rope, all your stuff, like all your buckets on you, all the elements around you, and then you need to do the fiberglass as well. So if you're learning everything at the same time, it can be a little bit overwhelming. But just take your time and you'll do just fine.
Alex, I'm going to ask you a question, and this is a non-rope access guy. How do you use the restroom when you're hanging on ropes?
There's different school of thought. You need to know that ammoniac, like we have ammoniac in our bodies, but it's one of the most dangerous material for a harness. It's ammoniac. Like it will just destroy your harness. So you need to be really careful of what you do when you go to the bathroom. I would recommend removing your harness before you do so. So it's either you go down or you can take the risk to do it up there. I already did it up there. It's not super fancy, but you can do it.
See, that leads into my question about taking care of your equipment. Sprat walks you through how to maintain your gear, right? What are some of the keys to keeping your equipment ready to climb?
So basically, as a level 1, you should, well, even all the levels, you should do like checkup every day before you climb the tower, or the job you're about to do. Is you check the webbing, you check your harness if it look good. You check if there's any discoloration, if you see some stitches going away, or if you see that it start to rip. Obviously, you need to discard. Same thing with plastic or metal. If you see cracks, if you see your plastic discolorating, or you see cracks in your plastic or your metal, you need to discard as well. But yeah, just make sure that everything looks right and there's no cracks or discoloration.
So let's talk about probably one of the most controversial topics when we talk climbing and ropes is helmets and all the protective gear, because everyone has their own opinion. Everybody likes a certain style, and if they choose the other brand, it's like it's not any good. I want to hear someone that I trust, Alex, you, what your thoughts are on some of the protective gear that you should be wearing when you're climbing and using ropes.
Well, I use the Petzl helmet. the Vertex Best. I've been using it since forever. I never change helmet. I know there's Cask and Petzl. I rather Petzl. For a couple of years, I think Petzl they were playing with their design, and there was some stuff that you had to buy clips to fit on your helmets to be able to put a visor and the protective earrings. But now I think it all came together, and their helmet is better today. Like you can wear a headlamp with a visor, and then you can have your protective earring on your helmet. But yeah, it's a must to have your headlamps, at least a visor. I like the visor and the protective earrings because when you do grindings, you want to protect your hair.
Right. So all the accessories matter there now. So the hearing protection is probably in the eye protection are the two big ones, and now they're incorporated into the helmet themselves or clip-on things now, right? So is there certain things about those that you should pay attention to? Maybe where like the hearing protection. I always think the hearing protection is very person centric. Like some hearing protection is comfortable, some of it is not. It's really a decision of the technician. Have you seen a lot of variation there? Have you tried a bunch of things? What works for you?
What's for me, it's really like the over here, like earring protective system, and then the visor for me. I wear glasses, right? So if I want to make sure that I'm fully protected, I wear the visor, then my glasses too. But yeah, I wear both. I like to have shades, so I take the shade visor. So yeah, I take the shade visor, my overall like earring protective, because sometimes when you put like just the one in your hair, little plugs, they wear out and you cannot use them like you cannot use them like often. Well, you can use them often, but you're not supposed to reuse a plug. So then like buying plugs every day, or just putting new plugs every day, then you're gonna lose them. As when you have them on your helmet, you're never gonna lose them.
I like the visor on the Petzls too because it makes you look like a fighter pilot.
Yeah, with the air protective too, you really look like a jet pilot. But when you have everything on your helmet, you're not gonna forget it because everything's on it.
That's the benefit, right?
Well, because when you're climbing, everything needs to be, you got to, the stop the drop. The whole industry talks about that, right? So everything has to be carabinered off and lanyarded off and all this stuff. So if all of those things that you use are connected to your helmet, boom, that's one much easier way to go about your day because you just, as soon as you clip that thing under your chin, you got all your stuff on.
Same thing for work gloves. What are you using?
Work gloves, the Petzl once again.
Really? You're using Petzl for that? Okay.
Yeah, the work gloves. Well, I mean, when I do rope access maneuver, I use my Petzl gloves. But when I do grindings, I use my cut resistant gloves. So I like the cut resistant glove from Grainer. I think they have some, and then the anti vibration too, because when you grind for long hours, it's gonna hurt your hands. So anti vibration and anti cut, it's the best.
Okay, so I want to talk about that. Now, it was leading to this question, the anti-vibration discussion. So over in Europe, they have limitations on how long you can operate a piece of equipment like a grinder because of the vibration and what it does to your hands and your arms. In North America, I don't think there are any regulations about that. Are there regulations about that in Canada?
Not that I know of, not that I heard of. Maybe there is, but I'm not really sure.
Yeah, from what I've seen in Canada, it doesn't seem like there is. So essentially, you could be using a grinder 4, 6, 8 hours a day. Gloves matter there. So what is the best in terms of anti-vibration gloves? I've seen a couple of them. They look really cool.
If you go on Uline and you wrote anti-vibration gloves, they're gonna be gray with a big Uline on it, and that's the one that I use, and they're pretty good. We use them for years, and they really make a difference, actually.
Okay. All right. Yeah, because it is a big issue over in Europe that they're actually limiting people. That's fascinating. All right. So there's a lot to do with SPRAT. And if you're a technician, especially you want to get into the wind industry, and now's the time to get into the wind industry, you're going to need SPRAT training, and you need to get to at least to a level 2. And that's going to take a bit of time. So you need to get started now and find the right place.